Evgenia, your husband was arrested in Moscow weeks, I guess months ago now, and there was supposed to be some understanding that he'd be detained for a short while. A short while has become longer, and then longer became even longer. And you have just returned home from your work looking into this and trying clearly to free him. What's the situation right now?
Vladimir has been in jail since April the 11th of this year. He is charged. He's charged with disseminating knowingly false information about the use of Russian armed forces under the new article that was introduced into the Russian criminal code only 9 days after the war had broken out in Ukraine, and that targets all anti-war dissent in Russia. This law targets anyone who tries to oppose this war, who tries to denounce the crimes committed by Putin's army on the territory of the sovereign state of Ukraine, and anyone who actually even calls this war a war instead of the special operation as the Russian government prefers to call it. Vladimir is currently facing up to 10 years in prison for opposing the war, for speaking out against it, and for spreading information about the war crimes committed by the Russian army in Ukraine. His pretrial detention has been extended till mid-August. It does not mean that his trial is going to happen then. It just means that they're keeping him locked up for longer and then longer and then longer. It's just we have a friend, Vladimir's colleague and his friend, Andrei Pivovarov, another political prisoner in Russia. So he's been held in pretrial detention for over a year now, and there still hasn't been a trial in his case. And that man was arrested for making 35 posts online, I think. And he is facing up to 6 years for just that. So this is the reality of today's Russia. All anti-war dissent is being squashed. The Russian authorities want to create this warped image of reality for the West, where the entire Russian population supports the president and supports his so-called special operation in Ukraine, whereas in reality, the Russian government does everything possible to squash all dissent, to eradicate all anti-war dissent, and people continue protesting. I think I don't remember the number I gave you last time we spoke, but since February the 24th, over 16,000 people have been detained across Russia. There have been 2,400 administrative cases under this new legislation that targets all anti-war dissent in Russia, and around 60 criminal cases under the same legislation, the criminal cases in which people can get sent to prison for up to 15 years for opposing the war.
Evgenia, how is Mr. Kara-Murza doing physically?
Well, he's a fighter. He wouldn't be himself if he's a fighter, and he continues speaking out even from behind bars. He continues raising his voice on behalf of political prisoners in Russia, and there are hundreds of them at the moment. According to Memorial Human Rights Group, that was banned by the Russian authorities in Russia last December, but it continues its very important work from outside of Russia. According to Memorial, there are currently 478 political prisoners in Russia, and the criteria they use to designate a person as a political prisoner are very strict. So they go through entire procedure, and they themselves say that the number is probably much higher, but they need to go through the whole process of designating a person as a political prisoner. But even according to these very well, let's say conservative estimates, there are almost 500 political prisoners in Russia nowadays. Vladimir will fight because he is who he is, and he's the man I love and admire very much. And I know that his fight will continue. There is no other option.
So, what about his safety and security? You know, he was poisoned twice and survived. And you know, essentially, he's being held by the same people who did that before. You know, maybe not directly, but they're responsible for it. How do you assess his safety and security at this moment?
Well, you cannot be safe and secure in a Russian prison, obviously. Russian prisons are notorious for torture, humiliation, extrajudicial killings, all of those things. But I am doing whatever I can to raise awareness about what is happening in Russia, about what is happening with my husband, who is, you're absolutely right, who is being held by the same people who tried to kill him twice in the past. And the fact that people such as my husband refuse to be intimidated and continue standing up to the regime enrages the Russian authorities, and it makes them, they're so afraid of any form of dissent nowadays in Russia that they detain people protesting in the street with a blank sheet of paper or with a copy of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. Or my favorite example, sadly favorite example, is the detention of several people who, as the official police report said, the official police report, were protesting with invisible anti-government signs. So this is the reality of today's Russia. The Russian government is very much afraid of dissent, and they're trying to lock up, intimidate. They're trying to hide away from the public eye all opposition activists who continue speaking up against all odds. In Vladimir's case, well, at the last hearing on the extension of his pretrial detention, there were 5 diplomats, including 1 US diplomat and 1 British diplomat, because Vladimir is a dual Russian-British citizen and he is a green card holder in the US. And there were also journalists and friends and family members present. They were all banned from entering the courtroom. And they were made to sit in a small, stuffy corridor with no air conditioning for over 3 hours. So they dragged this hearing for over 3 hours. And, you know, we are talking about a hearing in which the decision, the court's decision, was obviously known before the hearing even began. But they dragged the proceedings to, we believe, to just encourage all these people to leave, because they were being kept in this very small corridor, no air conditioning, you know, very stuffy, hot, and they stayed until the end of the proceedings, and then they were allowed into the courtroom to hear the court's decision. So I believe that the Russian authorities are trying to isolate my husband as much as possible, and they're trying to prevent his contact with the outside world as much as possible. And I'm trying to do everything to prevent them from doing that by speaking up, by being as loud as I can, by raising awareness about what is happening in Russia, because I believe that publicity is the main weapon in the struggle for human rights, in a peaceful struggle for human rights, because we are now facing something so monstrous that I believe that just by the only weapon we have left is publicity, being open about what is happening, because it is so much harder to kill someone when the entire world is watching.
Yeah. You know, what you are doing, what Alexei Navalny's wife and family are doing, what the family of Mr. Caramirza's other colleague that you mentioned a little earlier in this interview are doing, what all of the people, no doubt, family members of those that are detained by Russia, by the Kremlin are doing, is essentially raising this critical awareness by people all over the world of what's taking place. Still, Vladimir Putin continues to do what he does. The Kremlin still continues to carry out his orders. But I see something happening now that I wasn't seeing before. And what that is that I am starting to hear from people in Russia that they are questioning what it is that he's doing, what it is that the Kremlin's doing. And this is something that wasn't happening before you and your colleagues and your counterparts started to raise this story to this level. It seems as though, even though it's little by little, it seems as though what you're doing is working. So the question I'd like to ask you then, after that long intro to this, is what more can the people who are watching what you're doing, folks like us, do to get that word into the right ears?
Well, I just returned from Strasbourg, where I participated in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe event on political prisoners in Russia. And at that event and at the Parliamentary Assembly later was reviewed and adopted a report on political prisoners, on the situation with political prisoners in Russia, prepared by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe Special Rapporteur on Political Prisoners, Suna Versdottir. This report just describes the situation, describes the new wave of systematic political persecution against anti-war protesters in Russia. And it also gives a series of very important recommendations that can be followed by Western leaders, by members and observer states of the Council of Europe. And those recommendations include, for example, a call for supporting Russian civil society that continues fighting this regime both within the country and outside of it. There is a suggestion to carefully consider requests for asylum from former political prisoners and Russian opposition politicians and civil society activists, journalists, and human rights defenders who are forced to flee the country fearing persecutions, to make it possible for them to continue the very important work from outside of Russia, like those journalists who have been designated as foreign agents inside of Russia, and they are forced to leave, but they are very much prepared to continue their work creating this extremely important informational content for the Russian public. So they need to be able to do that, and in order to facilitate their work, they need, of course, to receive a legal status in somewhere in Europe to continue their work. There is also a recommendation addressed to the European Court of Human Rights. We do rely on such institutions as the European Court of Human Rights, not only because we are deprived of real justice back at home, and the European Court of Human Rights is very often the only resort for Russians to seek justice in their cases. But it also, the European Court of Human Rights, by providing its decisions on the cases of human rights violations in Russia, creates this very important legal basis for future prosecution against those human rights violators. Because in the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a major mistake made by democratic leaders of those times. There was no reckoning with the past. There was no process of decommunization, no process of lustration. which would have prevented these people from ever coming back to power, those former KGB agents, those former Politburo members, from ever coming back to power. We cannot afford making the same mistake again. But in order to bring these people to justice, in order to prosecute them, we need the legal basis that cannot be provided in Russia, because there is no rule of law, there is no independent justice system in Russia. So we do rely on such institutions as the European Court of Human Rights to help us with that. And there is also, of course, the access of information. I already spoke about journalists who are able to create this content, but there is also there are also a lot of obstacles for the Russians back home to access this independent, objective information about what is truly happening in Ukraine. Because on Russian state TV, you're not going to see the images of Bucha. You're not going to see what is happening in Mariupol. You're going to see tanks, Russian tanks, entering Ukrainian cities and Ukrainians greeting them with Russian flags. This is what is being shown to the public on Russian state TV, that it is Putin's propaganda machine has been working relentlessly for over 2 decades to create this warped image of reality. And we need to counter that by creating and providing the Russian public with independent, objective information. And of course, the number of VPN services installed since February the 24th shows that there is demand. There is high demand for objective information in Russia. But we also know that the Russian authorities are already starting to look for ways to block VPN services. So I am not tech savvy at all. My kids install all apps for me on my iPhone, but I think that trying to sort of break the signal between the VPN service and its clients. I'm not sure how it is done, but I am sure that there are people who understand more about it than I do, and who can somehow counter that, who can find ways to circumvent the blockade for the Russian public, the blockade that has been created by the Russian authorities, so that the Russian population could not access those blocked websites, blocked media outlets, and social media platforms. So there is a lot that can be done to support Russian civil society. And I want to emphasize how important it would be in countering this propaganda, this Putin's propaganda, if Western leaders sent a clear signal to the Russian authorities, to the Putin regime, that the West, the global democratic community, sees a difference. It does not equate the country to its government, and it sees and it is ready and willing to support Russian civil society that continues fighting the regime against all odds. It would be a very powerful signal, not only to the Russian civil society that needs support, that needs to feel like it's not alone in its fight, but it would also be a very clear signal for the Russian authorities that their image, that the entire Russian population supports the war and supports Putin, is not trusted, that the global democratic community does not believe this image created by propaganda.
Yeah. You know, you said a number of things that intrigue all of us listening and watching, not the least of which was what Western leaders need to do to counter this situation in Russia, and also making the leaders of this activity, Putin and all of the people in the circle, pay for this at some point. And so that's the message that we will carry. That is that we, as people who are watching all of this unfold, have a duty to not just sit here and watch, because this could happen to any other country or any other person anywhere, because these same people have designs on doing the same kind of thing in other places, like what they're doing in Ukraine. And so, you know, we see what's happening with Brittany Griner, the basketball player. We see what's happening with Paul Whelan, an innocent man who ended up in a Russian prison, sentenced to a long period of time. So we recognize, and thanks to you, we understand all of the things that they're going to do or try to do, Russia, the Kremlin, to cover up what they're doing. And we have to continue to try to find ways to expose it. So the one thing I'll ask you to end this is, can you give us an assessment of what you think the strength of the Russian government is? How, because we've seen several reports that indicate they can't continue fighting the war that they're fighting in Ukraine because they're running out of resources. There's also questions about Russian troops not willing to fight anymore, not that they ever were. Many of them didn't want to in the beginning. And also there's money, there's sanctions. So how would you assess the ability of the Russian government to continue doing what it is that they're doing?
Well, the reason they're doing what they're doing, the reason they invaded Ukraine, is this continued impunity that that emboldened Putin and made him believe that he could get away with anything, really. I mean, if he could occupy annex Crimea in 2014, why couldn't he occupy the entire Ukraine now, right? If he bombed civilians in Syria, why couldn't he bomb civilians in Ukraine? I mean, this is this continuous impunity that made him believe that he could get away with anything. So it is extremely important that this war is won on Ukraine's terms, that it ends on Ukraine's terms, not on Putin's terms. The Western leaders cannot even begin this rhetoric about not humiliating Putin. I mean, what is this? Not humiliating someone who is killing innocents, thinking about not humiliating someone who's killing kids. Seriously, Ukraine cannot be forced to donate part of its territory to Putin to appease him, because appeasement does not work when dealing with dictators. It has been proven time and again. It is only, he does not see it as a compromise, he sees it as a weakness. And if he sees it as a weakness, he's going to believe that he got away with it yet again, and he's just going to regroup and he's going to attack Moldova or one of the Baltic states or someone else. Ukraine, just Europe will never be free and whole without Russia. But for as long as Putin is in power in Russia, there is no one is safe. Obviously, no one is safe. So that sanctions should continue. Ukraine should receive heavy weapons to be able to protect itself, because it's not just fighting for itself, it's fighting for the entire free world. And we need to be there, we need to stand with Ukrainians, and we need to make sure that they're provided with everything they need to win this war on their terms, because they're just protecting their homes, they're protecting their kids, they're fighting for survival, they're fighting for their lives and for freedom of the entire world. So this is why it's actually, it concerns everyone. This is why we're all in this together, and we need to understand this, and we need to stand with Ukraine and continue supporting them. As far as the Russian government's strength is concerned, well, you know, Russia has been governed by corruption, by extreme corruption for over 2 decades. Everything's been stolen. I mean, everything. This is why, you know, we witnessed those reports about Russians using, what was it, something in their tanks from the washing machines. I don't know, some the chips, not sure what it was, but it just, nothing works. Everything just falls apart because everything's been stolen. So
Yeah,
I don't.
no, and I saw a report recently where the fighter jets that had been shot down actually had an off-the-shelf, store-bought GPS that was taped to the dashboard of a fighter jet.
Yes. This is what it comes down to, because everything's been stolen, because all the money that was supposedly being invested in the military never reached it. So, you know, and the fact that Russian civil society continues opposing the government's actions shows that even with this propaganda machine, even with all the resources that the regime is putting into propaganda, it does not help. You know, they're still losing. Over 15 conscription centers have been burned down across the country because those young men, those 18, 19 years old who would be conscripted and sent to the war, and maybe they're afraid to speak out publicly, to come out into the street with a slogan, no war, right? But by burning down a conscription center, they send a clear signal: we're not going to go to your war. We're not going to be sent to your war like meat. We're not going to fight Ukrainians. And this is a clear signal, and it is powerful. And I think that, well, the government is desperate. The Russian government is desperate, and this is why sanctions should continue, Western pressure should continue, and we should all be supporting those brave Russians who, like my husband, stand up to the regime no matter what, and they go back to Russia and they refuse to be intimidated and refuse to be forced out of the country, because they're prepared to stand with those who continue fighting in the country. And we need to support those who were forced to leave, to make sure that they continue their work. What I don't know, it's I think we just need to push and push and push, and that this is the only way until a bully is punished for his actions, his or her actions. He or she will never stop. So Mr. Putin has to be punished for the war crimes his army is committing in Ukraine. He has to be punished for his crime that he's been committing against the Russian population for 2 decades. He finally has to be brought to justice, and all those responsible for those crimes in his circle, in his army, they need to be brought to justice, and they need to be held responsible for what they're doing. This is the only way to end all of this.
Evgenia, thank you so much. You're very, very brave and articulate and intelligent woman. And Mr. Kara-Murza is fortunate to have a wife like you and a family like yours and friends like the ones that you have that are behind him. Thank you for coming and sharing your story and your time with us again. As I said to you months ago, we will continue to follow and continue to do whatever it is that we can to get this story out there, because it absolutely has to be out there. And people need to understand the reality of what's taking place, not just in Ukraine, but what's inside Russia and beyond. And your story is so valuable. So thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me here and for continuing to raise awareness, for helping me continue raise awareness about what's happening. Thank you very much.